Welcome to a brutal pro-revenge story from a legendary lawyer who inflicts heavy revenge on a company representative, causing him to lose everything, from reputation to career, and brings him to knees. The story is from Called in the 90s. Revenge on a client who tried to throw me under the bus. I was pushing 40, and I'd learnt a lot of lessons in more than 10 years of legal practice. But one of the most important lessons I learnt was from an older lawyer that I worked for as a summer student after the second year of law school. A lawyer has 3 duties, he told me. First to himself, second to the court, and last, the client. Always make sure you come first, and the client comes last. The reason? Because clients will f*** you, he said. They'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice. I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and an idiot, I had to go work downtown, and I'm still downtown now. But fortunately for me, I remembered this lesson. And it came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was this mid-sized company that did this and that, and owned things here and there, not big enough to be listed, but it did have a pretty sizable real estate portfolio, and one day a building they owned burned to the ground. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they told Frank, a veteran salaryman, to deal with it. Frank was close to 60 and thought he knew what he was doing. He didn't need me to help him with the insurance claim, he told me. He had everything under control. Besides, lawyers are expensive. Some guys really get off on not paying legal fees, and Frank was one of those guys who gloated over every penny that he managed not to pay to the lawyers. I dealt with Frank a lot, and he was always nickel and diming me. The insurer is going to f*** you, I told Frank. It was only by luck that I even knew about the fire and the loss, because Frank had not asked for my help. He'd just let it slip one day, and since then, I'd kept on top of him, trying to get him to smarten up. I'd had to fight to get him to send me the proof of loss form to make sure he hadn't messed that up. Frank f***ed up a lot, and I wondered sometimes how he had a job. But the proof of loss was okay at least, so that was one less thing to worry about. "You don't know that," he said. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. "I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to screw my clients," I said, "and the insurer is going to screw you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests and questions and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you, not unless you sue them." But Frank said he knew what he was doing, that it was all under control, and besides, he got along with the adjuster so great. "The limitation period expires in 2 weeks," I said, "and once those 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying, 'Sorry, you're out of time,' and that will be that. Don't leave this till the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time." Frank was like, "Sure, fine, whatever. Don't bother me. I got this blah blah blah," and he got off the phone as soon as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again, and then again as the limitation period approached, and again a couple of days before the deadline. "I'm going to be at trial, and you won't be able to reach me," my final email said, "but you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue." He didn't bother to reply, and I went off to do my trial. The trial lasted a couple of weeks, and there was no email from Frank. Then a month passed, and another month, still no email. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Frank was right after all, I said to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. "Remember that fire insurance thing we spoke about?" We'd only spoken about it like a dozen times. I figured he was calling up to gloat, so I cut to the chase. "So they paid out. That's great, Frank. You were right." He asked me what I was talking about, and could he see a copy of the claim? "What claim?" I said. "The claim against the insurer, you know, that claim." "Does that mean the insurer didn't pay?" I said. He hung up on me, and then a few minutes later, my computer dinged, and there was Frank's email, talking about how we spoke, and he told me to sue, and he was worried when I hadn't sent him a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get a copy of the claim. I emailed him back. "I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't, and now that the limitation period is expired, they told you to jump in the lake, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it?" I'd made a mistake by not going over Frank's head when he wouldn't listen to me, but if I'd gone over Frank's head, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now. So I CC'd Frank's boss and his boss's boss, plus I CC'd Bill, the client's in-house counsel. Bill acknowledged my email right away and called me later that day. "Frank messed up," he said. "We know that. He's an idiot. So what do we do?" "So his excuses didn't work?" "Nope." Bill explained that they'd summoned Frank to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I'd sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he'd told me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Frank's role is over. The company knew Frank was bullshitting them. "So that's it then?" Bill said. "We just lost a couple of $1,000,000. "It's okay," I said, explaining that when I realized that Frank was going to f*** up, I issued a claim against the insurer. Because I'd made Frank send me the proof of loss a while earlier, I had enough information that I could sue to preserve the cause of action. Not a great claim, and short on details, but good enough. "You sued without instructions?" Bill said. "Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without instructions, because if you do that, you're personally liable for whatever costs the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions." "Yep," I said. "I sued without instructions." I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to him as we spoke. "It's a little rough," I said, "but we can always amend." "Thank God," Bill said. "Can I leave it with you?" Of course he could. The insurer was a sitting duck, and I knew I'd collect from them, no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another guy who worked for the client, a guy I didn't normally deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. "I usually deal with Frank," I said. "What's up?" What was up was that Frank got called into another meeting, and they handed him a one-page letter, and then he put his little office things in a box, and security walked him past his co-workers to the elevator and escorted him downstairs to the parking lot. Bye-bye, Frank. He was too old to get another job, or at least, not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Frank, but for me, he was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale that I tell young lawyers sometimes over beers, maybe too often, because I'm getting on in years and I have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Frank, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus, but the guy who replaced him was great and never nickeled and dimmed me, so it was all good. The revenge was really brutal and eye-opening for Frank. The lawyer's decision to claim the insurance without instructions from Frank saved millions for the client, and it also exposed Frank's incompetence, ultimately crushing his reputation and career. It was a bitter but valuable lesson for the irresponsible Frank. It was not only revenge, but also a proof of OP's professionalism. Let's now jump on to the next story from Weird_Stories. Here? New ownership takes over and guy goes on vacation for 2 years due to stupid new rules. A family friend was working at the same company since he was 26 up to when he was 64, when the below started. I did get his approval to retell the story, just not include anything specific, so I am keeping it anonymous and quite general on the specific details. Part of the problem was the laws in the country increasing the retirement age from 62 to 65 when he was in his early mid-50s, and then again from 65 to 67 when he was about 62 to 63. The old owners were a family and run the business with benefits to the employees. From everything I have heard, I think they were giving an extra vacation week after every 6 years at the company. So on top of the standard 4 weeks, he had an extra 6 weeks at the time of the events. Also, people had access to 2 weeks of working home office, when the job allowed them to, or an extra week off, for those that couldn't use it. So he was getting 11 weeks off each year. As a bonus, the family owners were allowing people above 55 to use their vacation time as they desired. All at once, with about a 2 weeks notice, which was just a courtesy, according to the guy, or segmented, or even not use it and pile it up for when the retirement time came. Another issue we have at our country is that when you submit retirement paperwork to the government, they take ages. So it is often the case that they may take over 2 years to calculate what to pay you and start paying you. Of course they pay back that time, but it still is an issue. For the period they delay and calculate, you are getting only the minimum amount, but the guy had already about 44 years of experience and a bit more ahead of him as an engineer and a well-paid one, which meant a great retirement amount. So the owners allowed for people to gather up their weeks of time off at the end of it and take 20 to 30 weeks off while submitting their retirement paperwork, so the money being paid would last them longer into the calculation period. Of course, some didn't use it, but many did. So the company gets sold because the owners saw some writing on the wall that their profiting wouldn't last more than 6 to 7 years more, and they wanted out. It was due to old age as well. New ownership, part of some Coca-Cola subsidiary, takes over and starts removing previous rules. At the guy's position, there were 3 of them. Him, a second colleague, and a third one. They push out the second, fire him, and the third one has a heart attack literally a week later. RIP. They also go and dock his pay by 15% because he is making too much for a simple engineer. The 3 of them hold a patent for the machinery used on something specific, a second one on how to make that machinery, and a third one on the process of the production of a small but significant part. Old owner had allowed them to put the patents on them when they invented a new, 30% cheaper and 75% faster, way of production years ago. So suddenly, he is alone on that position at 64, and the company hires 6 people for him to train, on that position. At the same time, they give up to the end of the year for all the piled up vacation time to be claimed. Notice the wording, claimed, not used. So the guy was using between 1 and 5 weeks for the past decade. So he had gathered 87 weeks of time off, including the current year. But they hadn't looked at specific cases, apparently. So they get him the 6 new people to train, and they tell him that he needs to have them trained in 6 months. He still has 2.3 to 2.5 years until retirement. So he just goes and takes 87 weeks of vacation time with a 3 hours notice on a Friday evening starting the upcoming Monday. Still no advance notifying is required. They don't pay attention on it until the next Thursday, when the CEO notices the 6 people sitting around all day and nobody training them. The phone calls start, then emails, then letters get added to the mix, then home visits by low-ranking secretaries and such to deliver the letters, then management visiting his home. By week 7, the CEO has visited 3 times, but the door hasn't been opened once. His mother-in-law lives literally across the street, old woman, and him and his wife are taking care of her, so most of the time they are over there and can see everybody visiting their house XD. The production is actually running on itself, but no upkeep is done on that critical part of it. Week 11, he says that line 1 out of the 2 breaks down. They start visiting his house 3 to 4 times a day. 2 weeks later, second line breaks down. He obviously has a lot of friends inside and is getting constant updates. At that point, they have only 4 weeks of backstock to keep the rest of production running. It is December, right before Christmas, and he goes in during week 13. He says he needs to take some things from his locker room, LOL, and the CEO starts yelling at him. "You are stopping your time off right now. You are coming back to work to fix everything up." So he offers to come back for 3 days under an agreement that the entire week will be returned to him to use for time off. The CEO reluctantly agrees and tries to push him also for the training. No budging, only fix things up and go on vacation again. By Saturday, everything is fixed up and even leaves a couple of basic instructions on what needs greasing every week. And he is off again. Few weeks pass, New Year has come around and a line is broken again. He gets called back and CEO pretends like the previous deal will be used again. He goes in for 2 days, fixes everything, explains couple more things to the team of 6, who by now have other duties, not to be sitting around all day. And when he is about to leave, the CEO says, "Tomorrow at 8 a.m. The guy says what? And the CEO explains, "You could claim your time off by the end of last year. You just ended your claimed time off, so you are losing the remaining 69 weeks. The guy is furious, and he just goes straight and reports the company to workers' rights. They are actually dumbfounded by the time off he has amounted, and the lady serving him calls her colleagues to listen in. They laugh their asses off by his story, and they actually issue a verdict the next day. It usually takes weeks, but apparently they had too much fun with this one. He is to get all of his time off under the previous rule, for the time accrued up before the rules changed. So he has his 69 weeks, should be 70 due to him getting the one he worked on, renewed by their deal, but he lost that one. And he also has the 6 weeks from the new year, So he goes in with the verdict and gives it personally to a fuming CEO. According to the guy, steam was coming out of his ears. The CEO accepts unwillingly the deal with the guy coming in for 3 days every 5 weeks off. If he is needed during his time off, tough luck. They should work to produce backstock. A full year goes by that way, and the guy is 66 at this point. He has been training the 6 slowly every 5 weeks, LOL, and he is on his last visit before he takes the last 5 weeks off. The CEO goes to him and delivers personally the firing notice for the first day he will be back. He plays shocked and leaves for another 5 weeks. This one is a problem, because if you apply for retirement, even with half a year early less, you are losing significantly more than just that small period, and he has about 10 months ahead of him for retirement. His last 5 weeks expire and he goes in to gather his stuff. Only a coffee cup was remaining. He knew this was coming and he had taken everything over time. He gets an extremely big payout for the firing with no cause. Next day, he sends a cease and desist letter to the company for the use of the 3 patents. He had talked with the fired guy, who had agreed with this revenge plan. He had also talked with the widow of the now dead friend and colleague as well, and had both of them on board. He had been supporting actually the widow, but he didn't say anything to anyone. I found out very recently, formed the other guy about it. So now the company has to stop using those machines, and the method with 0 notice. All the competitors have found and built and patented their own versions of the same, and if they don't find a solution, it is going to cost 40% more, and take about double time to produce the same part of the procedure of production. So they would need to double the lines if they go and use the old method, while they look for a new one. After just 3 weeks of looking to license the method of one of the competitors, and not getting anywhere, stock being extremely low by that point, they struck a deal with the guy. He will be an external contractor, who obviously keeps the patents to his name. He will be doing the maintenance on his own, will be paid by the hour, what he was previously making on a full day, and he will be on call for maintenance while having one person there at all time for upkeep. He went and stole all 6 of the people he trained, and hired them in his new company, and put them to work back at that factory again, with almost double the pay they were receiving. He fully trained them very quickly, and he was now getting paid a ton. That CEO was fired for almost stopping production. The deal was struck mere hours before backstock ended, and he also cost the company a ton of money by firing that guy. At the funeral of the old owner, many of the old employees met up and told their different stories. And apparently, there were 3 more similar cases with patent holders, because the old owner treated his team extremely well. But he apparently was the only one to string them on for almost 2 years by being out on vacation time and getting paid. All of them had a great laugh, including the widow of the owner and his sister, who were the other 2 partners in the factory before it got sold. It was edited to fix mistakes only. Apologies for the hard reading. Update. Correction. 2 points I noticed that are not clear. The 6 people he stole from the factory to work for his new company that are then contracted back to the factory are earning what he was making when he worked at the company, and was considered too much. Their salary was extremely lower, so my comment above about them Kiang double is incorrect. Apparently the factory was paying all 6 combined what the hero was making before he got that 15%. So for all of them, it was a huge pay raise. I would leave the factory as well if I received an offer for the same exact work, but an increase of about 550%. This I learned from the hero, as an update. Apparently at the time that they stroked that last deal for him to work as a contractor, the backstock was 2 hours from finishing. But what was his last ace up his sleeve in negotiating was that, don't forget that I need at least 3 days to fix both lines, so you already need to shut the factory down for 3 days. And every minute you delay this deal, it's another minute of the entire factory being down. Apparently, a single line couldn't produce enough for production to resume. 2 lines produce about 110 to 120% of the required thing for production to continue, so he needed to get both lines up. The factory actually shut down for almost 4 days, and those idiots didn't pay the workers for those 4 days that they were not working, which ended up a class action from over 800 workers at the Workers' Rights Office, which led to a fine and forcing the factory to pay them. And that was the last drop that made the glass overflow. The news got to management from outside the country, and ended up costing the CEO his job. The revenge was intense and satisfying. The new administration wanted to screw OP over, but fed up with the new rules, OP used his secret weapons, engineering patents, and long privileged vacations to cripple the company's production process, forcing them to hire him again at a higher pay and causing the CEO to resign. The revenge was truly a masterclass, 1 in 1,000. Let's now jump onto the next story from Flowing_Oddity. Say goodbye to your house and your retirement. This one is not technically my revenge, but some revenge I got to see up close and take joy from and slightly participate in. The background is most of the story, so this will be a little long. Trigger warning for self-harm. I was in the Navy and stationed at the submarine base in Connecticut. I had a friend I met in boot camp, and we were in the same class for our A school, Navy job training. We'll call that friend Bill. Now, Bill wasn't the most physically fit guy. He was short, kind of chubby, and wore glasses. However, Bill was really smart, and as the sonar technician he was meant to be, he would have been amazing. He had a pragmatic way of looking at things I really valued in a friend, and I know it would have made him successful if he had made it out to the fleet. While in school, we had a couple of petty officers that were hard. They somehow convinced themselves they were super soldiers, despite the fact that our jobs in that field are really nerd-centric. You get picked for that job because of your math and computer skills, not your deadlift number. Still, they were both all about being fit and working out all the time. We would do physical training 3 times a week, and while most of us could keep up, Bill often fell behind on runs or didn't quite meet what these 2 idiots believed to be the standard. To be clear, Bill did pass the minimum requirements for fitness, he just didn't go as extreme as these guys. Side note for other Navy vets, he got the MC pawn coin for how hard he pushed himself at PT the day he visited. The end result was that they would constantly berate and belittle Bill. They'd call him fat, lazy, and everything else. They'd tell him he should kill himself, you name it. They were always on his despite him passing his assessments. At some point, Bill pushed himself too hard and injured his knee. He told these petty officers he was injured and had been seen by the doctor on base. The doctor had put him on light duty so the knee could recover. He had the paperwork to back it up. They elected to ignore that and threaten him with kicking him out if he didn't do the workouts. So Bill kept pushing himself, injuring himself more, and his mental health degraded the whole time. In my time in the Navy, you didn't really get mental health services. The only person to talk to like that was the chaplain. For those who don't know, the chaplain is the religious leader, usually a pastor/priest/rabbi, that has signed up as a commissioned officer. Our chaplain was the sweetest little woman you ever met, but as a chaplain, she held the rank of captain, high-ranking officer. So Bill set up a meeting with the chaplain to talk about things. When Bill informed the petty officers he would be missing class the next day for his chaplain meeting, they yelled at and berated him more. They called him a cat, useless, not fit for the Navy, and everything else you can imagine. They convinced Bill he was being weak and the chaplain wouldn't care about his issues, that nobody would care. They promised to make life even harder if he didn't show the next day. So he cancelled his meeting. Evidently, bad luck hit, and that night his girlfriend was also breaking it off with him. She wasn't worth his time or money, but he couldn't see that. That night, I awoke to a 3 a.m. call from Bill. I couldn't hear anything, and I asked several times, "Bill, you there? Are you okay?" It wouldn't have been the first time that I got a drunk dial from one of my friends after a hard day like Bill had. Sailors have been known to drown their sorrows a bit. Eventually, I figured it was a butt dial drunk dial and hung up and went back to bed. I still regret that decision. The next day, all hell broke loose. Me and a couple other friends got calls from Bill's now ex-girlfriend, informing us he was in the hospital because he slit his own throat. It turned out a few of us got that 3 a.m. call, but Bill couldn't speak at the time and was kind of out of it due to blood loss. We finished what we had to do on base and rushed over to the hospital. As we got there, the chaplain was on her way out, and we passed her in the hallway. She spoke to us briefly to say that Bill would be okay, and she wouldn't forget this. I have never seen a look on someone's face that so accurately depicted raw, unfiltered rage. It took us all by surprise because she was such a small, sweet, and personable lady. But from the look in her eyes, you could just tell she wanted someone to pay for this. She wanted revenge, and we all knew she wore the kind of rank that could get it done. We visited Bill, who could barely talk, but he told us the story of what had happened, what he was thinking at the time, and how glad he was it didn't work. Apparently it was cold enough that the blood clotted on the outside of his neck, and made a kind of patch that kept him alive long enough for the EMS to find him and get him to a hospital. The doctor said he missed his carotid by about 1 millimeter. A week went by, and we hadn't heard anything until we got called in by the chief of the training command, the boss to these petty officers. He said he wanted to check on the rest of us and make sure there weren't any other issues with these guys he wasn't aware of, and that we were all okay. I let him know about an ass chewing he gave me a few months back, that I was really set up by these guys, and they had lied to him. My friends cited a couple other examples of their own, with these guys being generally dishonest people. I don't think it mattered. I think their fates were already sealed, and we were being asked for more ammo to bury them with. The next day, they were nowhere to be found, and we were introduced to new instructors who would be taking over our training permanently. After class, I decided to stop by and ask the chaplain what happened. She told me she had never been more disgusted by the actions of a sailor than these two guys who convinced someone not to come see her. She teared up a bit, regretting that she didn't get the chance to help Bill before he made his attempt. In her mind, it was these two that precipitated and enabled Bill's attempt. So on to the revenge. The chaplain told me she went to the admiral in charge of the entire base and demanded their immediate discharge. He granted it. Both petty officers were immediately processed out with dishonorable discharges. I can't remember the exact charge I heard they cited for it, but I know the Navy has a way of selling BS on paper when they want a certain outcome, especially officers at that high level. So basically, they get no VA benefits of any kind, got kicked out of the base housing they lived in, and could probably only find work at a gas station or under-the-table stuff somewhere. Also, I know from someone else who got the boot that the Navy only pays for a single bus ticket to get you back home, not your family or any of your belongings. When you have a discharge like that, no company with DoD contracts is allowed to hire you. That includes McDonald's because they have stores on bases throughout the country, Taco Bell, Subway, etc. None of them will give you a job. They can't, and they don't want to anyway. So, I don't know where these guys went or what became of them, but I know their lives were irrevocably ruined. One of them had about 18 years in, so he was 2 years from retirement and lost it all. The other was at about 12 years, so he also lost a lot. Wherever they are now, I'd be very surprised to hear they're making more than minimum wage. As for Bill, well, he made a full recovery. He got a full medical discharge, which is an honorable discharge that meant E5 pay for the rest of his life, full benefits, and a referral to a counselor in his home state once he got back there. All paid for by the Navy. We lost touch over the years, but I did see on Facebook he got himself together, became a police officer, and got married. Edit to add, for those who have pointed it out, their discharges were actually OTH, but I didn't want to have to explain the difference or have people Google it. We always used dishonorable colloquially for OTH BCD because they all mean you got the boot and your life is going to stink. But no, they didn't do full CM or any break time. But I did hear they pushed it to ASB and lost. Also saw someone pointed out Bill wouldn't get the medical at 100% for his neck. That's also true, he wouldn't have, but they wrote it up for his knee because it was basically bone on bone inside. I think they decided to do him a favor and not put him down as a mental health discharge. Really gratifying revenge. The revenge was really satisfying and perfectly executed. The petty officers received the punishment they deserved. The chaplain made sure that the abusive officers faced life and career-destroying consequences by stripping them of their retirement benefits and future opportunities. The revenge was swift, complete, and aligned with the harm they caused to Bill. What do the Mac Reddit fans think? Is the OP an AH or not? Let me know in the comment section below. If you like the stories I brought you, just hit the like button. Share them as much as you can. And don't forget to subscribe to Mac Reddit for a daily dose. Bye bye, see you tomorrow with some more spicy fries.